The thunder of absence was louder than the eulogy. That empty chair beside his father's mahogany casket cost my son a dynasty, proving entitlement is the deepest grave. The cold, relentless Chicago rain was a fitting soundtrack to the betrayal. It wasn't the shock of Alistair Vance's passing, a brutal 8-month siege of the body by an aggressive, unforgiving disease, that shattered Alara Vance's composure. Nor was it the accumulated toll of the 45 years she had spent standing beside him as he carved the Vance global shipping empire out of sheer will and ambition. No, the moment Alara understood that her only son Damien had forfeited his right to inherit that kingdom occurred when she stared at the gap in the front row of the mausoleum chapel. It was the space where Damien, the golden-haired heir apparent, should have been seated, mourning the man who had given him everything but the sacrifice, Mr. Sterling. Alistair's legal counsel and confidant of 3 decades hovered nearby, his face etched with professional sympathy and personal grief. "Mrs. Vance," he murmured, his voice battling the muffled sound of the rain against the granite and the hushed coughs of the hundreds of mourners. "Should we wait a few more minutes?" "Perhaps traffic?" Alara barely heard him. She was lost in the sight of the polished, deep mahogany casket, an artifact of immense dignity, being lowered slowly onto the hydraulic lift. The casket contained Alistair, the formidable man whose intellect had built a billion-dollar fortune, but whose final moments had been spent fighting for breath. And still, the chair remained empty. Reese, Alistair's sharp-witted executive assistant, whose loyalty had been forged over 25 years of grueling work, approached Alara, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I called his private line again, Mrs. Vance." His wife, Serafina, answered. She said something about a 41st birthday celebration running long. A private yacht in the Caribbean, a complication with the flight schedule, a birthday celebration. The words landed like granite stones in the hurricane building inside Alara's soul. Her father, the tireless founder, was being committed to the earth, returning to the cold soil of the Midwest that had inspired his grit. And his son, the beneficiary of a lifetime of hard labor, was extending a party. Not an emergency, not a delay of consequence, but a party. Alara adjusted the thick veil that shielded her face. The mask of dignified grief was paramount. She was the matriarch of the Vances, and her grief belonged to her alone. She nodded curtly to Mr. Sterling, who was looking at her, then at the empty space, his expression a mirror of the collective judgment of the gathered employees and business titans. "Begin," Alara commanded, her voice surprisingly strong, a tensile wire of control against the internal tremor. "The service will proceed now," as the elderly pastor began reading the familiar, blurring passages about life and resurrection. Alara's mind retreated to the sterile quiet of the hospital room from only 3 weeks prior. Alistair, though impossibly thin, had gripped her hand with surprising strength. His blue eyes, usually blazing with entrepreneurial fire, were now clouded with a deep, sorrowful resignation. "He's not ready for it." "Alara!" Alistair had rasped, the words catching in his throat, a testament to the destruction the disease had wrought. "And I don't think he ever will be. He is an echo of me, not a successor." "He is 42 years old, Alistair," Alara had argued back, the well-worn defense mechanism of a mother kicking in, protecting her child even from his own truth. "He will step up when the mantle is passed. He just needs the pressure of ownership." Alistair had simply smiled sadly, a ghost of his former booming laugh escaping as a painful cough. When he recovered, he reached for a manila folder from the bedside table. "That is why I created the provision. The final choice, Alara, will be yours. You will know the moment. You will know what is right for the empire we built together, for the thousands of families who depend on it. That moment is the only legacy that matters now." Now, watching the casket sink, shrouded by the sound of the rain and the solemn silence of the witnesses, Alara understood. Alistair hadn't been testing Damien. He had been testing her. The moment had arrived, clear and cold as the November air. The empty chair had spoken louder than any testament. The reception at the magnificent Lakeshore Drive penthouse was a muted affair. The high ceilings and panoramic views of Lake Michigan seemed to mock the solemnity of the occasion. Richard's peers offered their condolences, their voices low, their respect for the deceased profound. Alara moved through the rooms with a practiced, almost mechanical grace, accepting the hushed sympathies while her fingers compulsively checked her phone. Still no message from her son. At precisely 6:30 in the evening, nearly 5 hours after his father had been buried, the private elevator chimed. Damien strode into the room, his bespoke Italian suit immaculate, his hair perfectly coiffed, radiating an aura of effortless wealth that looked jarringly out of place against the backdrop of collective mourning. Serafina clung to his arm, wearing a tailored dress that, while black, possessed a festive cut and an appropriate amount of sparkle. Neither of them carried the burden of genuine grief. "Mother," Damien said, planting a cool, detached kiss on her cheek. "Terribly sorry about the service. Serafina's 41st celebration was planned months ago. You know how important appearances are in that crowd. You understand the optics, don't you?" Alara looked at her son, seeing Richard's strong, angular jawline, but none of his character in the entitled smirk. She saw him clearly for the first time, a hollow man, defined by consumption, not creation. "The reading of the will is tomorrow morning. At 10 o'clock, Alara stated, her voice flat, devoid of the maternal warmth she had always instinctively given him. "Mr. Sterling insists that all primary beneficiaries be present." Damien lowered his voice, adopting a conspiratorial air. "About that, Mother. Serafina and I were hoping to catch a private jet to Zurich tonight. Can't we just wrap up the formalities next week? What's the rush, really?" Behind him, Reese, the executive assistant, inhaled sharply, unable to mask the shock. Several of Alistair's oldest partners turned away, disgusted by the sheer callousness on display. "No." "Thomas," Alara replied, the words sharp and precise, like slivers of ice replacing blood in her veins. "We cannot. You will be there, or the consequences will be significant." A flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed Damien's face. He had never heard this finality, this steel from his mother before. It was the tone of his father, the one that meant an argument was over, the decision final. "Fine," Damien grumbled, pulling Serafina toward the door. "We'll reschedule our flight. Don't worry." As they departed without speaking to a single mourner, a final, glaring insult to the memory of Alistair, Alara caught Serafina's calculating gaze sweeping over the elaborate, century-old Ming Dynasty porcelain collection Alistair had painstakingly acquired. Serafina was already calculating the auction value, undoubtedly. Later that night, Alara was alone in the cavernous master bedroom she had shared with Alistair for over 4 decades. The silence was deafening, the air thick with his absence. She walked to the large, built-in mahogany safe hidden behind Alistair's favorite portrait, a vibrant painting commissioned on his 60th birthday. Inside, nestled on a shelf, was a simple, sealed cream envelope. Her hands, usually steady and capable, trembled as she broke the wax seal. "My dearest Alara," the letter began in Alistair's familiar, elegant script. "If you are reading this, 2 things have already occurred. I have left this world, and Damien has, in my absence, finally shown you who he truly is. I never wanted to break your heart by saying this, but our son is not the man we raised him to be." Tears finally blurred Alara's vision as she absorbed her husband's pain and wisdom. She read Alistair's final instructions, the premeditated provision in the will, the choice he had left to her sole discretion. It was the power to ensure Damien would never be rewarded for the profound disrespect shown to the man who built his future. "You will make the right decision, my love," Alistair's letter concluded. "You always do. For the legacy. For the thousands." As the cold Chicago dawn broke over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in colors of pale gold and silver, Alara made her decision. The time for maternal excuses was over. The time for accountability had begun. "Damien will learn tomorrow," she whispered to the empty room, to the husband no longer beside her, "that actions and absences have profound consequences. The lawyer's office awaits, and so does justice." The weight of her grief was now sharpened by a fierce, unshakable resolve. She knew this was the hardest thing she would ever do, but she would honor Alistair's final trust. The Vance legacy, built on 45 years of blood, sweat, and integrity, demanded nothing less than the truth. The air in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Associates was thick, still, and charged with anticipation. The enormous oval table, capable of seating 20 people, felt confining with only 10 principal figures assembled. On one side sat Alara, her posture rigid, a picture of aristocratic control. Next to her were two of Alistair's most trusted executives, James Woodson, the acting CEO, and Marcus Chen, the chief financial officer, their faces grim. Across the table, Damien and Serafina sat stiffly. Damien continuously checked his platinum wristwatch, a gesture of impatience that was less a display for the room and more a reflection of his true disposition. Serafina scrolled openly through her phone beneath the table, the subtle clicking of her elaborately manicured nails against the screen a minor, yet grating disturbance. Beside Damien, almost tragically separated from her father, sat Cassandra, Damien's 22-year-old daughter from his first failed marriage. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, were fixed on the polished wood. Unlike her father, Cassandra had visited Alistair religiously during his final illness, reading aloud to him when his sight failed, sharing quiet moments the entitled son had deemed too inconvenient. She represented the genuine grief Damien lacked. Also present were Margaret, Alistair's younger sister, who oversaw the family's charitable foundation, and Mr. Sterling, the solicitor, flanked by his legal associate. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, the sound a gentle hammer blow against the tension. "Before we begin the distribution, Alara," he said, his voice deep and measured, "I want to express, once more, my profound condolences. Alistair was a great man and a dear friend." Alara offered a brief, barely perceptible nod, her hand clutching a handkerchief Alistair had given her on their 40th wedding anniversary. "Thank you, Walter. Please proceed with the reading." Mr. Sterling opened the voluminous, thick document, a testament to the complexity and sheer scale of the Vance estate. This last will and testament of Alistair James Vance, being of sound mind and body at the time of its creation 6 months ago, represents his final wishes for the distribution of his estate, which, as you know, is valued in excess of $1,200,000,000. Serafina's head snapped up from her phone, her eyes suddenly gleaming with a greedy, focused intensity. Damien straightened his spine, the casual impatience replaced by eager anticipation. "I shall summarize the standard provisions first," Mr. Sterling continued, adjusting his reading glasses. "The Lakeshore Drive penthouse and the summer estate in Maine are bequeathed to Eleanor Vance, along with all personal effects and an immediate cash transfer of $50 million, free of all taxes and encumbrances. This, I believe, is as anticipated." Damien offered an impatient flick of his wrist. This was the expected preliminary phase. "The majority of the estate," Mr. Sterling continued, his gaze drifting over the assembled executives, "consists of the voting shares of Vance Global Shipping, which are to be distributed as follows." He paused, glancing briefly at Alara before settling his stern focus on Damien. "To Damien Mitchell Vance, son of the deceased." Damien leaned forward, a triumphant, half-formed smile touching his lips, already calculating the immense wealth and power this represented. Mr. Sterling slowly enunciated the next words. "Conditional upon the integrity provision on page 27, section B." Damien's smile froze. What integrity provision?" he interrupted, his voice laced with suspicion, the confidence abruptly wavering. Mr. Sterling methodically turned several pages. "The clause reads as follows: the bequest of the majority voting shares, and thus the control of Vance Global Shipping, to my son, Damien Mitchell Vance, is expressly conditional upon the sole, absolute, and unchallengeable discretion of my wife, Alara Vance, regarding his conduct during my final illness and his participation in my funeral arrangements." The color drained from Damien's face, leaving his skin a sickly mottled white. Serafina stopped scrolling, the sudden silence of her nails a vacuum in the room. Mr. Sterling continued to read, his voice taking on the hard, unyielding clarity of the law. Should Alara Vance deem his behavior to be materially disrespectful, negligent, or willfully inappropriate, she is authorized to invoke this provision, thereby redirecting his entire inheritance as fully outlined in Alternative Distribution Plan C. That can't be legal, Damien sputtered, his voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and mounting panic. I assure you, Mr. Vance, it is perfectly legal, Mr. Sterling replied calmly, placing the document flat on the table. Your father had this specific clause vetted, authenticated, and affirmed by 3 separate independent legal teams. The courts have consistently upheld carefully defined moral character or integrity clauses, particularly in large estates where the testator's clear intent is to protect a company's foundational values. Serafina's grip on Damien's arm tightened to a painful clutch. Damien, what does this mean? She hissed, her eyes darting between Alara and the lawyer. Mr. Sterling looked directly at Alara, drawing every eye in the room to the matriarch. Mrs. Vance, do you now wish to invoke the integrity provision? The silence was crushing, the tension in the air almost visible. In that singular, terrifying moment, Alara did not see her son. She saw the full tapestry of 42 years of excuses flash before her, the missed family gatherings, the contemptuous attitude towards Alistair's legacy, the constant prioritizing of Serafina's extravagant, unending wants over the needs of the Vance family, and finally, the chilling, unforgivable sight of the empty chair at her husband's burial while Damien attended a yacht party. Yes, Alara said, her voice a whisper that nonetheless carried the weight of steel. I invoke the clause. I deem his behavior inappropriate, negligent, and profoundly disrespectful. Damien sprang violently to his feet, chair scraping loudly across the polished floor. Mother, you cannot be serious. You're destroying my life over a flight delay. You abandoned your father's funeral to attend a birthday party, Damien, Alara responded, her voice dangerously quiet. You couldn't spare one day to properly say goodbye to the man who spent his life building something for you to inherit. It was Serafina's 41st. We had dozens of international guests. It cost an absolute fortune. Damien's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. Each excuse a shovel-load of dirt onto his own reputation. And that, Alara concluded, her eyes locking onto his with the cold, unyielding gaze Alistair had reserved for failing competitors, was more important than burying your father. Cassandra, overwhelmed, covered her mouth, stifling a ragged sob at her father's raw display of entitlement. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, restoring a semblance of legal order. In the event the integrity provision is invoked, he stated, turning back to the document, Alternative Distribution Plan C directs that Damien Mitchell Vance's inheritance of Vance Global Shipping voting shares and all associated liquid assets be fully redistributed as follows. Serafina's breath hitched, a harsh, tearing sound. Damien stood frozen, a statue carved of disbelief. Mr. Sterling delivered the verdict, each word a nail in the coffin of Damien's future. 30%, 30%. To the Alistair Vance Foundation for Educational Opportunity. 30%, 30% to Cassandra Elaine Vance, granddaughter of the deceased, to be held in a structured trust until her 30th birthday. 30%, 30% to the Vance Global Shipping Employee Pension Enhancement and Security Fund. And, finally, 10%, 10% to Eleanor Vance, to distribute at her sole discretion. Serafina's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You planned this. This is elder abuse, a malicious manipulation, she screamed, her carefully curated composure utterly shattered. The only manipulation, Mr. Sterling interjected firmly, his voice cutting through her hysteria, was Alistair Vance's careful legal planning, enacted to protect his life's work and legacy from precisely the attitude and behavior that has been so publicly displayed in the last 48 hours. Damien slowly, mechanically sank back into his chair, shell-shocked. So, I get nothing? 42 years as his son, the heir, and I get absolutely nothing? You received everything a son could want, Thomas, Alara replied, the pain of the truth piercing her own resolution. A father who loved you, who built a world for you, and who wanted nothing more than your respect and presence in return. That you threw away? This is preposterous. Damien sputtered, tears of frustration and entitlement welling in his eyes. I will contest this. I will bury this in court for years. You are welcome to try, Mr. Sterling said with cold finality. But Alistair anticipated that reaction as well. The will includes an explicit no-contest clause. Any beneficiary who challenges the will's validity forfeits even the minimal, specific provisions granted to them elsewhere in the document. Minimal provisions? Damien demanded, struggling to grasp the depth of his fall. Mr. Sterling turned a final page. Your father left you his first desk, a folding card table on which he wrote his original business plan. And he left you his personal collection of books on business ethics and the value of integrity. The tragic irony was unbearable. Serafina stood abruptly, snatching up her expensive handbag. We're leaving, Damien. Call Jensen, call everyone. We need a shark who will actually fight for us. She stormed out of the conference room, the heavy mahogany door slamming shut behind her. Damien followed, pausing at the threshold to look back at Alara. I will never forgive you for this. Mother, he said, his voice cold, hollowed by fury and disbelief. The room remained silent after they left. Mr. Sterling continued reading the remaining provisions, detailing Cassandra's structured trust, the charitable foundation's focus on underprivileged youth, and the employee pension enhancement that would secure the future for the thousands of workers who had built Alistair's dream. When the reading concluded, and the others began to file out, Cassandra remained, moving to sit beside Alara. Grandmother, she whispered, taking Alara's hand, tears tracing paths through the lingering grief on her cheeks. I am so sorry about Dad. Grandpa deserved better. Alara squeezed the girl's fingers tightly, finding a strange comfort in the sincere grief of her granddaughter. Your grandfather loved you very much, Cassandra. He saw in you everything he had hoped to see in your father. As they left the office together, Alara felt the weight of her choice, heavy, painful, yet necessary. Alistair had entrusted her with this terrible power, and she had honored his wisdom. The battle for the Vance legacy had begun, and Alara knew that Damien, driven by entitlement, would not surrender a billion-dollar birthright without a prolonged, destructive fight. The public spectacle, she knew, was only just beginning. The legal papers arrived on Wednesday morning, delivered by a grim, stern-faced courier who refused to meet Alara's eyes. 63 pages detailing the initial petition to contest the will. The allegations were a calculated, brutal assault. Alara's deteriorating mental state, Alistair's medication-induced confusion, and, most painfully, the claim that Alara had manipulated her dying husband against his only son, driven by irrational jealousy over Damien's relationship with Serafina. Alara placed the documents on the heavy oak desk that had once belonged to Alistair, now hers, and immediately called, Mr. Sterling, they've gone nuclear. As expected, Mr. Sterling stated after Alara described the filing. This isn't just about contesting the will anymore. They are attacking your cognitive capacity, your character, and the entire history of your marriage. Their attorney, Grayson Mills, is infamous for these scorched earth tactics. All to avoid admitting Damien couldn't sacrifice one day to properly bury his father, Alara replied, surprised by the steady, cold anger that settled in her chest. Pushing the pain aside, Alara, you must be prepared, Mr. Sterling warned. They have requested access to Alistair's full medical records, your phone records from the last 6 months, and they are seeking depositions from every member of the household staff. They are looking for anything, any slight tremor of grief, any moment of frustration, to suggest you unduly influenced Alistair. Let them look, Alara countered. Richard and I made this decision together, with clear minds and broken hearts. The truth will hold up. That afternoon, the first breach of privacy occurred. The phone lines at the penthouse were inundated with calls. The first reporter, from a minor Chicago business publication, asked for comment on the Mitchell family war. By evening, the dispute was front-page news online. Vance Global Shipping in turmoil, Widow battles son over billion-dollar estate. Cassandra called, her voice trembling with distress. Grandmother, Dad gave an interview. He's telling people you've had episodes since Grandpa got sick, that you've become confused and vindictive. He's claiming it's a temporary insanity, triggered by grief. Are you surprised, my dear? Alara asked gently. He is desperate. But this public humiliation, is the price of the entitlement he holds so dear. He believes the money is his, and he will drag our name through the mud for it. The next morning, Reese, Alistair's former assistant, arrived at the penthouse, a thick, pristine folder in hand. Mrs. Vance, I thought you should see this immediately, Reese said, his expression one of protective loyalty. The communications team prepared it 6 months ago. Mr. Vance instructed me to hold it until Eleanor needs to remember why she is fighting. Inside was a comprehensive media strategy, a pre-written defense against the inevitable public attack. It included press statements emphasizing Alistair's sound mind, sworn testimonials from executives detailing Damien's chronic absenteeism, and carefully curated photos showing Damien missing key company events while vacationing in exotic, impossibly distant locations. Alistair authorized this? Alara asked, stunned by the prescience and thoroughness of her late husband. Reese nodded gravely. He said, if Damien forces a public fight, we will be ready to defend Alara's honor with the truth. Even from beyond the grave, Alara, he was protecting you. He was protecting the legacy. Alara touched the antique wedding band she still wore, feeling the surge of his presence. We will hold off, she decided, closing the folder. We will respond if necessary, but I will not fire the first shot against my own son in the public arena. That is still too low a path. Reese seemed relieved. That's what Mr. Vance predicted you would say. However, there is something else. Reese pulled a sealed black envelope from his tailored jacket. He asked me to give you this if Damien publicly attacked your mental state. Inside the black envelope was a handwritten note from Alistair and a small, secure memory card. The note read simply, the nuclear option. Your call, my love. Use only if Damien leaves no alternative. The memory card contained video footage Alara wished she could erase from her memory. Footage of Damien at formal company functions, visibly intoxicated, making inappropriate, crude comments to female employees. Footage of Damien arguing viciously with Alistair during his illness, accusing his dying father of emotional manipulation for asking him to attend a board meeting. And finally, the most sickening footage of Damien and Serafina mocking Alistair's cancer symptoms, the coughing fits, the fatigue, when they believed no one was listening, calling it the old man's slow. Boring exit! Alara locked the card in the safe behind Alistair's portrait, sick at heart. Richard had anticipated every possible move, every potential low blow, but had left the final choice of total destruction to her. The lawsuit's first official hearing, the preliminary injunction, was scheduled for the following week. In preparation, Mr. Sterling arranged for Alara to be examined by 3 independent psychological experts to create an unassailable record against the claims of grief-induced confusion. All 3 reports are impeccable, Mr. Sterling assured her over the phone. They confirm you are perfectly competent, exhibiting appropriate grief, but absolutely no cognitive impairment. Combined with Alistair's precautionary videos explaining his decision-making process, we are on solid ground. Will it be enough? Alara asked, the question heavy with the toll this was taking. It should be, Mr. Sterling admitted, but Damien has hired Grayson Mills, Chicago's most aggressive estate litigator. Prepare for personal attacks in court, Alara. They will try to provoke you, make you appear unstable, or turn you into the vindictive caricature they have manufactured. That night, unable to sleep, Alara wandered through the penthouse. The silence of Alistair's absence of physical ache. She found herself in Alistair's private study, opening drawers she had avoided since his death. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath old blueprints of the company's first massive cargo ship, was a leather-bound journal Alara had never seen. The first entry was dated 5 years earlier. Damien missed another board meeting today, Alistair had written. the third this quarter. Claimed Serafina needed him for some last-minute charity gala. The board is noticing. Worse, Damien is noticing that they notice. Pride wounded, he lashed out, accusing me of embarrassing him. When did my son start believing he deserves immense power without the basic responsibility of showing up? Alara read for hours, tears silently blurring the ink as Alistair chronicled his growing, heartbreaking concern about Damien, his futile attempts to mentor him, and eventually, his agonizing decision to protect the company he loved from his own son's profound sense of entitlement. The final entry, written just 2 weeks before his death, broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. I have failed him, Alara. Or perhaps we both did. Giving him too much while asking too little of his character. The hardest part of dying isn't leaving the company, or even leaving you, my love. It's knowing I won't be here to help Damien become the man he could still be. That burden now falls to you, and it is heavier than any I have ever asked you to bear. The next morning, fortified by Alistair's enduring hope, Alara called Cassandra. I need you to deliver a message to your father, my dear. Tell him I'm willing to meet him. Just the two of us. No lawyers, no Serafina. Today. Do you think he'll come? Cassandra asked doubtfully. Tell him it's about a potential settlement, Alara replied, the steel returning to her voice. He will come. 2 days later, Damien arrived at the penthouse at the specified time. He was dressed impeccably, yet the strain of the public scandal and the financial uncertainty had etched new, premature lines onto his face. He looked guarded, hostile, and utterly exhausted. Mother, he said stiffly, declining her offer of coffee with a curt wave. Cassandra said you wanted to discuss terms. I assume you've finally realized that fighting a billion-dollar estate case is futile, and you're prepared to offer me a respectable settlement? Alara regarded him calmly from across the vast expanse of the living room. The space that had once echoed with Alistair's booming laughter now feeling like a neutral. Cold courtroom. I wanted to give you one chance, Thomas. To withdraw your lawsuit before things become irrecoverably uglier, Alara said simply, leaning forward. Damien laughed, a short, bitter bark of disbelief. Withdraw? You have literally stolen my birthright. My inheritance. You've attempted to destroy my future and my reputation. Your father made a choice, Damien. I honored it, she replied. Because I missed part of a funeral. He exploded, the anger momentarily overcoming his cultivated composure. A single day's mistake cost me $1 billion. Is that what you call justice? What kind of twisted family loyalty is that? Alara shook her head sadly. It wasn't one day, Damien. It was years of days. It was years of indifference. Moments when your father desperately needed his son, and he found a stranger, an entitled man who treated his life's work as a cash machine, instead. Convenient interpretation now that he's gone and cannot defend himself, Damien sneered. His expression hardening. He never complained to me. He was proud of me. He tried, Damien. For 20 years he tried to make you care about the substance, not the status. He tried to tell you, through every patient meeting and every missed opportunity. He stopped trying because he realized you had stopped listening. Well, now it's up to the courts, Damien retorted, turning dismissively toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. And they don't rule based on sentimental missed father-son moments. They rule based on legal precedent and evidence of undue influence. As he turned to leave, sensing the confrontation was fruitless, Alara spoke one final, devastating sentence that stopped him cold. Damien, I have videos. Your father documented everything. Your behavior at company events, your cruel comments about his illness, your arguments, everything. Alistair was a meticulous man, a founder who understood the need for accountability. You know that, Damien froze, his body rigid, the color instantly draining from his face. You're bluffing, he croaked, but the word lacked conviction. Alistair kept a security camera running in his home office during the last 6 months of his life. He kept records of conversations. He understood what Serafina and you were capable of, and he left the evidence with Reese, with the explicit instruction to use it only to protect me and the company. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in his eyes, the first genuine crack in his armor of righteousness. Then, his jaw set, and his fury returned, stronger than before, fueled by fear. "Release whatever you want, Mother," he spat, regaining his composure with a visible effort. "Serafina and I have already given 5 extensive interviews about your fragile mental state and the obvious manipulation of a dying man. Who do you think the media will believe? The grieving, confused widow, or the son fighting to honor his father's true legacy?" Damien turned and strode out, the sound of his departure echoing through the penthouse. Alara sat alone in the growing darkness, Alistair's worn leather journal clutched to her chest. The battle lines were drawn, and her son had chosen scorched earth over any potential path to reconciliation. The fallout was immediate and devastating. The news of the contested will and the dramatic courtroom confrontation had a ripple effect that spread far beyond the Vance family. The stock of Vance Global Shipping, usually an impenetrable fortress of stability, began to fluctuate wildly. The next morning, Alara sat in Alistair's massive corporate office, now officially serving as chairman emeritus to guide the succession. James Woodson, the acting CEO, looked profoundly worried. "Mrs. Vance, we have a crisis," James explained, placing a heavy dossier on the desk. "The European shipping contract with the May Group, our longest and most lucrative partnership, worth over $120 million annually, is threatening to pull out." Their representative cited leadership uncertainty following the public disputes. "The May Group has been with us for 23 years, Alara noted, scanning the contract details. "Headlines alone wouldn't do this. They know Alistair's integrity is what backed the contract." James looked grim. "It's worse than headlines, ma'am. Damien contacted them directly last week. He claimed he would soon resume control and wanted to renegotiate the terms of their agreement. They were confused and, frankly, insulted by the competing amateurish messages. He deliberately undermined the company's stability." Alara's hand tightened into a fist, crushing a paperweight. "He actively sabotaged the empire his father built. He is using his remaining title as regional director to destroy the foundation of his own potential inheritance." For 2 agonizing hours, Alara and the executive team worked to salvage the relationship. Alara personally led a video call with the May Group's leadership, offering her personal guarantee that the company's long-established succession plan, promoting the loyal and competent James Woodson to full CEO, would be honored. Their relief was palpable when she confirmed that Damien was permanently out of the line of control. After the executives filed out, James lingered, his expression still troubled. "Mrs. Vance, there's something else you must know. Serafina has been sending aggressive job inquiries to several senior staff members. She is trying to identify who might be sympathetic to Damien's position, or worse, looking for inside. Proprietary information she can leak or use in court. She's looking for leverage," Alara realized. "The contagion of entitlement runs deep." "Yes, and Thomas, as regional director, still has high-level clearances to sensitive files. He's been accessing records that have no bearing on his current duties." Alara made an immediate, decisive choice, the voice of the matriarch firm and unyielding. "Restrict his access immediately. Total electronic lockdown. If he asks why, refer him to Mr. Sterling and our legal team. State that his actions constitute a clear and present threat to the company's operational security." "That is a significant, unprecedented step, ma'am." "He is still technically an employee," James cautioned. "He is an employee actively working against the company's $120 million interests," Alara countered, standing up. "Alistair would have done the same. Protect the company above all else, James. That is the true Vance legacy." The predictable explosion occurred precisely 1 hour later. Damien stormed into the Vance Global Shipping headquarters lobby, ignoring the security desk, demanding to see his mother. Security immediately called upstairs to James Woodson, who then relayed the message to Alara. "Escort him to Alistair's private office," Alara instructed, her voice calm. "Let him come. It is time for this confrontation to occur on Alistair's territory." Damien burst into the immense corner office, the pinnacle of the Vance empire, his face flushed purple with rage. He was breathing heavily, his impeccable composure completely gone. You have locked me out of my own company's systems, he bellowed, his voice echoing off the paneled walls. Your father's company, Alara corrected calmly, rising slowly from the high-backed leather chair that Alistair had occupied for decades. The one you are currently trying to destroy through baseless litigation, unauthorized contact with partners, and attempts to poach sensitive data. You have leveraged your relationship with those partners for years and are now weaponizing that access to create instability. That stops today, Damien. Damien paced frantically across the expensive Persian rug, running his hands repeatedly through his perfectly styled hair. A nervous gesture so startlingly reminiscent of Alistair that Alara's heart constricted, despite everything. This is absurd. This is abuse of authority, he shouted. I am fighting for what is rightfully mine. For the name I carry. No, Damien, Alara countered, her voice retaining a lethal calm. You are fighting for what you believe you are entitled to. There is a profound difference. You think you deserve power without responsibility, wealth without work, and loyalty without reciprocation? He stopped pacing, his eyes wild. His voice dropped to a dangerous low snarl. You know what Serafina says? She says you have always been jealous of me, that you resented how Dad groomed me to take over, worried that I would eclipse your influence. The accusation was so ludicrous, so profoundly disconnected from reality, that Alara almost smiled, a brittle, sad expression. Is that what she tells you, Damien? Your father and I spent 25 years trying to interest you in the actual business. The grit, the logistics, the thousands of shipping manifests, beyond the corner office, the private elevator, and the unlimited expense account. You showed up for the glamour, the handshake photos, and you disappeared for the work. That is absolutely not true, he protested, but his eyes slid away from hers, unable to hold her gaze. It is true, Alara insisted, stepping closer, forcing him to face her. Alistair documented everything. The missed crisis meetings when you were in the Maldives, the botched contract negotiations you didn't prepare for, the 3,000 employees whose names you never once bothered to learn after a decade in management. Damien slammed his hand onto Alistair's desk with a resounding crash. Stop talking about me like I was some disappointment. Dad was proud of me. He loved you desperately, Alara said quietly, the simple truth devastating. That is very different from pride in your work. He loved who you could be. He was disappointed by who you chose to be. A flicker of raw emotion crossed Damien's eyes. A moment of profound, painful clarity quickly masked by rage. Listen to me. Damien, Alara pressed, leaning across the desk. The company is suffering from your actions. Contracts are in jeopardy. Our stock value is fluctuating. Employees are distracted and worried. Is that truly what you want? To damage the legacy that took 45 years to build, just to claim ownership of its ruins? I want what's mine, he repeated, but his voice was now weaker, tinged with uncertainty. Even if getting it destroys everything else? Your reputation? The company's stability? The Foundation's work? Alara paused, watching his reaction closely. Your marriage? His head snapped up. What about my marriage? Don't you dare insinuate anything about Serafina. Is it an insinuation? Alara challenged gently. Tell me, where is she now, Damien? Here supporting you? Or with her lawyers, planning the next, more aggressive attack? When was the last time she asked how you were feeling about losing your father, instead of how much money you'd lost? Damien snarled, but again his eyes betrayed his fear. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know that before Serafina you visited your father every single Sunday, Alara stated. I know you once valued family traditions, like Alistair's annual fishing trips. All that changed when she decided those things weren't worth your time. And I know she was complaining about visiting your dying father in the hospital, calling it putting in her time until the payoff. Cassandra overheard her, Damien. She told Reese. Damien went completely still, the air draining from the room. Cassandra. She's lying. She's taking your side. When has Cassandra ever lied to you? Alara asked, her voice filled with maternal sorrow. Even when you missed her birthdays, her graduation from college, she never made up stories about you. She has always loved you too much for that." For a devastating moment, Damien looked completely lost. The angry, entitled man replaced by a small, confused boy trying to reconcile two utterly contradictory truths. Then his phone buzzed violently. He glanced at the screen, and his expression instantly hardened, the defense mechanism snapping back into place. "Serafina needs me at the lawyer's office," he said stiffly, turning away, avoiding Alara's gaze. "This conversation is over." As he reached the door, Alara called out, her voice a final, heartbreaking plea. "Damien, whatever you decide about the lawsuit, know this. Alistair's greatest regret wasn't disinheriting you. It was failing to help you become the man he knew you could be." He paused without turning, his shoulders tense and rigid, absorbing the weight of the last sentence. Then he walked out without another word, leaving Alara alone in the echo chamber of Alistair's legacy. The lines of the final battle were now irreversibly drawn. Following the intense confrontation in Alistair's office, the atmosphere in the Vance family settled into an agonizing, fragile Cold War. Damien had retreated into the legal stronghold commanded by Grayson Mills, the aggressive litigator, while Alara focused on steering Vance global shipping through the turbulence created by the public dispute. 2 days after their showdown, Cassandra called Alara, her voice tight with worry. "Grandmother, Dad came to my apartment late last night. He asked if what you said about Serafina, about her comments in the hospital, was true. I told him everything I had heard and saw. He just sat there silent for almost an hour, then left without saying anything at all. I'm worried he's going to do something reckless." "You did the right thing, my sweetheart," Alara assured her, though her own concern was mounting. Sometimes the truth hurts the most before it can ever begin to heal. Later that evening, Alara received a text message from Damien himself. It was the first direct, non-hostile communication he had initiated since the will reading. "We need to talk. Not about the lawsuit. About Dad, tomorrow." Alara responded simply, "Come for breakfast." 8 a.m. Sleep utterly eluded Alara that night. She wandered the silent penthouse, the vastness of the space amplifying the sense of loss. She eventually found herself in Alistair's meticulously organized closet, running her fingers over the expensive fabrics of his suits, inhaling the faint, lingering scent of his favorite cologne. In the breast pocket of his beloved navy tweed jacket, she discovered a small, leather-bound notebook she had never seen before, different from the business journal she had found earlier. The first page bore a title that instantly brought tears to her eyes: "Things I Wish for Damien." What followed was not a list of material bequests, but a collection of profound, deeply paternal hopes and dreams. "I wish that he finds purpose beyond the accumulation of wealth, that he values the hard-earned relationships in his life over fleeting social status, that he discovers the deep, quiet satisfaction of building something meaningful with his own hands, that he becomes the father Cassandra deserves, one who consistently shows up." As Alara turned the final pages, Alistair's handwriting grew shaky and uneven, clearly penned during the worst stages of his illness. "My final wish, that he understands someday why I made this painful choice. That he forgives both Alara and me for the final lesson we had to teach, and that he discovers that it is never, ever too late to become the person he was truly meant to be." Tears streamed down Alara's face as she clutched this hidden testament to Alistair's enduring, agonizing hope for their son. Even as he had made the final, painful decision to protect the legacy by redirecting the inheritance, he had never once stopped believing in Damien's ultimate potential for change and redemption. "Oh, Alistair," Alara whispered into the empty room, "what would you have me do now?" As the pale light of dawn broke over Lake Michigan, Alara carefully placed the worn notebook on the breakfast table, precisely where Damien would sit. Whatever happened next, Damien needed to hear his father's voice, not through the cold, aggressive medium of legal documents, but directly, heart to heart, across the painful divide of death. Damien arrived precisely at 8 a.m., alone but visibly diminished. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually immaculate appearance showed telltale signs of neglect. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and his hair was uncombed. Grief and stress had etched new, deeper lines around his mouth. He looked older, tired, and broken. "You came?" Alara said simply, opening the door wider. "I said I would," he replied, his voice lacking the recent hostility, replaced by a weary, flat emptiness that concerned Alara more than any anger. She led him to the kitchen, where she had prepared Alistair's traditional weekend breakfast: scrambled eggs with garden herbs, thick-cut sourdough toast, and strong black coffee. For decades, this had been their family ritual, until Serafina had deemed it boring and introduced Damien to expensive champagne brunches at five-star hotels. Damien stared at the familiar spread, a sudden sharp pang of nostalgia visible in his eyes. "You remembered," he murmured. "Some traditions matter enough to preserve, I suppose." They sat across from each other, the morning sun streaming through the windows, illuminating the vast, indifferent expanse of the city below. For several minutes they ate in complete silence, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them like a dense fog. Finally, Thomas set down his fork, pushing the plate away. "Serafina is gone," he said, his voice raw, though Alara had strongly suspected this was inevitable. Hearing the confirmation brought her no satisfaction, only a profound maternal sorrow for her son's pain. "I am truly sorry, Damien." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped him. "Are you?" "You practically predicted it, Mother." "Being right about something painful doesn't make it any less painful to witness," Alara replied, the honesty of the sentiment cutting through the tension. "What happened?" Damien stared fixedly into his coffee cup. "After our conversation in the office yesterday, I went back. I confronted her about what Cassandra overheard. She denied it at first, then became violently angry that I would dare question her loyalty. We argued. Things were said. I asked her directly, would she stay if there was no inheritance coming, no prestigious position at Vance Global Shipping? He shook his head, the motion slow and disbelieving. She packed 3 suitcases, took all her jewelry, including your mother's tennis bracelet you gave me for her last birthday, and said she didn't sign up for this humiliation. 12 years of marriage, and she was gone within an hour. His voice cracked completely on the final word. Alara instinctively reached across the table, covering his hand with hers, the first moment of genuine physical contact between them since Alistair's funeral. He didn't pull away. "I am truly sorry, Damien," she repeated, her voice thick with emotion. "Despite everything, I never ever wanted this specific pain for you." He nodded, then finally noticed the small, leather-bound notebook resting beside his plate. "What is this?" he asked, pointing to it. "Something of your father's I found last night," Alara said gently. "I think he would want you to have it now." Damien opened it hesitantly, his face clouding with confusion that swiftly morphed into profound, naked grief as he read the first page. "Things I wish for Damien." For the next 20 minutes, he sat in complete silence, turning the pages slowly, occasionally wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. When he finally looked up, something irreversible had shifted in his face. The aggressive, entitled anger was gone, replaced by a raw, devastating vulnerability. "He never told me any of this," Damien whispered, the words barely audible. "Would you have listened then?" Alara asked gently, repeating the question Alistair had struggled with for years. He closed the notebook carefully, its cover worn from Alistair's touch. "No, probably not." He looked out at the Chicago skyline, the beloved, impossible city his father had conquered. "I didn't know him at all, did I?" "You knew the father who loved you unconditionally, Damien. You didn't know the man who built something extraordinary through sheer sacrifice and integrity. He wanted you to know both." Alara poured more black coffee for both of them, the simple ritual filling the silence. Damien continued to stare out at the city skyline, Alistair's beloved Chicago, where he had started with only one leased dock and a second-hand tugboat 45 years prior. The weight of his father's ambition and success was finally pressing down on him, stripped of its protective veneer of inherited wealth. "I remember when I was about 10 years old," Damien said suddenly, his voice distant, thick with nostalgia and loss. Dad took me to the original dock where he started. It was still operational then, just a tiny fraction of the company, but still his first footprint. He introduced me to every worker by name. He knew their kids' names too. They all respected him so much, not because of his wealth, but because he was fair, and he never forgot where he came from. A single tear tracked a path through the exhaustion on his cheek. I told him I wanted to be just like him when I grew up. You still can be, Damien, Alara said quietly. Not in running his company. That opportunity has passed, as a result of your own choices. But in understanding what actually made him remarkable, his belief that success meant nothing without integrity. That wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. That showing up for the people who depend on you matters more than any bottom line. Damien absorbed this in silence, turning Alistair's small notebook over and over in his hands. When he finally spoke again, his voice was utterly different, the entitled air replaced by someone quieter, more thoughtful, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. I'm dropping the lawsuit, he said. Relief, immediate, profound and dizzying, washed through Alara. But she kept her expression carefully neutral. Why? Because Dad was right. Damien met her eyes directly, the vulnerability profound. I haven't earned it, and fighting you through the courts won't change that fundamental crushing fact. What about your lawyers, Mr. Mills? Serafina? Alara asked, testing the depth of his resolve. Serafina is gone. As for Mills, I will instruct him to cease all litigation today, pay his egregious bill, and terminate our relationship. I will handle it personally. No more hiding behind legal facades. Damien straightened his shoulders, a posture that, for the first time, conveyed genuine personal strength, not inherited arrogance. They moved into the living room, where generations of Vance family photos lined the immense bookshelves. Damien stopped before a picture of himself at 16, standing proudly beside Alistair on the deck of the company's flagship vessel, both beaming in the sunlight. The air in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Associates was thick, still, and charged with anticipation. The enormous oval table, capable of seating 20 people, felt confining with only 10 principal figures assembled. On one side sat Alara, her posture rigid, a picture of aristocratic control. Next to her were two of Alistair's most trusted executives, James Woodson, the acting CEO, and Marcus Chen, the chief financial officer, their faces grim. Across the table, Damien and Serafina sat stiffly. Damien continuously checked his platinum wristwatch, a gesture of impatience that was less a display for the room and more a reflection of his true disposition. Serafina scrolled openly through her phone beneath the table, the subtle clicking of her elaborately manicured nails against the screen a minor, yet grating disturbance. Beside Damien, almost tragically separated from her father, sat Cassandra, Damien's 22-year-old daughter from his first failed marriage. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, were fixed on the polished wood. Unlike her father, Cassandra had visited Alistair religiously during his final illness, reading aloud to him when his sight failed, sharing quiet moments the entitled son had deemed too inconvenient. She represented the genuine grief Damien lacked. Also present were Margaret, Alistair's younger sister, who oversaw the family's charitable foundation, and Mr. Sterling, the solicitor, flanked by his legal associate. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, the sound a gentle hammer blow against the tension. Before we begin the distribution, Alara, he said, his voice deep and measured, I want to express, once more, my profound condolences. Alistair was a great man and a dear friend. Alara offered a brief, barely perceptible nod, her hand clutching a handkerchief Alistair had given her on their 40th wedding anniversary. Thank you, Walter. Please proceed with the reading. Mr. Sterling opened the voluminous, thick document, a testament to the complexity and sheer scale of the Vance estate. This last will and testament of Alistair James Vance, being of sound mind and body at the time of its creation 6 months ago, represents his final wishes for the distribution of his estate, which, as you know, is valued in excess of $1,200,000,000. Serafina's head snapped up from her phone. her eyes suddenly gleaming with a greedy, focused intensity. Damien straightened his spine, the casual impatience replaced by eager anticipation. "I shall summarize the standard provisions first," Mr. Sterling continued, adjusting his reading glasses. "The Lakeshore Drive penthouse and the summer estate in Maine are bequeathed to Eleanor Vance, along with all personal effects and an immediate cash transfer of $50 million, free of all taxes and encumbrances. This, I believe, is as anticipated." Damien offered an impatient flick of his wrist. This was the expected preliminary phase. "The majority of the estate," Mr. Sterling continued, his gaze drifting over the assembled executives, "consists of the voting shares of Vance Global Shipping, which are to be distributed as follows." He paused, glancing briefly at Alara before settling his stern focus on Damien. "To Damien Mitchell Vance, son of the deceased." Damien leaned forward, a triumphant, half-formed smile touching his lips, already calculating the immense wealth and power this represented. Mr. Sterling slowly enunciated the next words. "Conditional upon the integrity provision on page 27, section B." Damien's smile froze. What integrity provision?" he interrupted, his voice laced with suspicion, the confidence abruptly wavering. Mr. Sterling methodically turned several pages. "The clause reads as follows: the bequest of the majority voting shares, and thus the control of Vance Global Shipping, to my son, Damien Mitchell Vance, is expressly conditional upon the sole, absolute, and unchallengeable discretion of my wife, Alara Vance, regarding his conduct during my final illness and his participation in my funeral arrangements." The color drained from Damien's face, leaving his skin a sickly mottled white. Serafina stopped scrolling, the sudden silence of her nails a vacuum in the room. Mr. Sterling continued to read, his voice taking on the hard, unyielding clarity of the law. "Should Alara Vance deem his behavior to be materially disrespectful, negligent, or willfully inappropriate, she is authorized to invoke this provision, thereby redirecting his entire inheritance as fully outlined in Alternative Distribution Plan C." That can't be legal," Damien sputtered, his voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and mounting panic. "I assure you, Mr. Vance, it is perfectly legal," Mr. Sterling replied calmly, placing the document flat on the table. "Your father had this specific clause vetted, authenticated, and affirmed by 3 separate independent legal teams. The courts have consistently upheld carefully defined moral character or integrity clauses, particularly in large estates where the testator's clear intent is to protect a company's foundational values." Serafina's grip on Damien's arm tightened to a painful clutch. "Damien, what does this mean?" she hissed, her eyes darting between Alara and the lawyer. Mr. Sterling looked directly at Alara, drawing every eye in the room to the matriarch. "Mrs. Vance, do you now wish to invoke the integrity provision?" The silence was crushing, the tension in the air almost visible. In that singular, terrifying moment, Alara did not see her son. She saw the full tapestry of 42 years of excuses flash before her, the missed family gatherings, the contemptuous attitude towards Alistair's legacy, the constant prioritizing of Serafina's extravagant, unending wants over the needs of the Vance family, and finally, the chilling, unforgivable sight of the empty chair at her husband's burial while Damien attended a yacht party. "Yes," Alara said, her voice a whisper that nonetheless carried the weight of steel. "I invoke the clause. I deem his behavior inappropriate, negligent, and profoundly disrespectful." Damien sprang violently to his feet, chair scraping loudly across the polished floor. "Mother, you cannot be serious. You're destroying my life over a flight delay." "You abandoned your father's funeral to attend a birthday party, Damien," Alara responded, her voice dangerously quiet. "You couldn't spare one day to properly say goodbye to the man who spent his life building something for you to inherit." It was Serafina's 41st. "We had dozens of international guests. It cost an absolute fortune." Damien's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. Each excuse a shovel-load of dirt onto his own reputation. "And that," Alara concluded, her eyes locking onto his with the cold, unyielding gaze Alistair had reserved for failing competitors, "was more important than burying your father." Cassandra, overwhelmed, covered her mouth, stifling a ragged sob at her father's raw display of entitlement. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, restoring a semblance of legal order. "In the event the integrity provision is invoked," he stated, turning back to the document, "Alternative Distribution Plan C directs that Damian Mitchell Vance's inheritance of Vance Global Shipping voting shares and all associated liquid assets be fully redistributed as follows." Seraphina's breath hitched, a harsh, tearing sound. Damian stood frozen, a statue carved of disbelief. Mr. Sterling delivered the verdict, each word a nail in the coffin of Damian's future. 30%, 30%, to the Alistair Vance Foundation for Educational Opportunity. 30%, 30%, to Cassandra Elaine Vance, granddaughter of the deceased, to be held in a structured trust until her 30th birthday. 30%, 30% to the Vance Global Shipping Employee Pension Enhancement and Security Fund. And, finally, 10%, 10% to Eleanor Vance, to distribute at her sole discretion. Seraphina's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You planned this! This is elder abuse! A malicious manipulation!" she screamed, her carefully curated composure utterly shattered. "The only manipulation," Mr. Sterling interjected firmly, his voice cutting through her hysteria, "was Alistair Vance's careful legal planning, enacted to protect his life's work and legacy from precisely the attitude and behavior that has been so publicly displayed in the last 48 hours. Damian slowly, mechanically sank back into his chair, shell-shocked. "So, I get nothing? 42 years as his son, the heir, and I get absolutely nothing?" "You received everything a son could want, Thomas," Alara replied, the pain of the truth piercing her own resolution. "A father who loved you, who built a world for you, and who wanted nothing more than your respect and presence in return. That you threw away? This is preposterous." Damian sputtered, tears of frustration and entitlement welling in his eyes. "I will contest this. I will bury this in court for years." The following weeks were dedicated to the meticulous process of unwinding the damage. Damian formally resigned as regional director, ensuring James Woodson's smooth promotion to CEO was cemented. The transfer of the $1,500,000 salary back into the Vance Global Shipping Employee Pension Enhancement Fund made headlines in the business section, this time positive. Vance Hare forgoes salary to fund employee pensions. The public narrative began to shift, moving from vindictive family battle to reluctant redemption. Alara found herself spending increasing amounts of time at the Alistair Vance Foundation headquarters with Margaret, Alistair's sister, who ran the charitable arm with a quiet efficiency that belied its vast reach. "He came by this morning," Margaret told Alara one Tuesday, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "Damian, not in a suit, but in a casual shirt carrying a thermos. He spoke to the receptionist, applied for the lowest-rung community liaison position, and asked to spend the rest of the day simply shadowing our field workers. He didn't mention the lawsuit once." "What did you tell him?" Alara asked. "I told him he was overqualified and that we were concerned about his lack of field experience," Margaret confessed, her smile widening. "He simply looked me in the eye and said, 'Aunt Margaret, I'm used to starting from the wrong place. I'm ready to learn how to start from the right one.' So I gave him a stack of grant applications and a map of Southside Chicago. He's starting tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp." This was the transformation Alara had prayed for. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, if painful, humility. The most poignant moment came when Damian visited the old dock. The first piece of property Alistair had ever acquired, and the symbolic minimal provision left to Damian in the contested will. The folding card table, where Alistair wrote his original business plan, had been moved there by Reese. Damian called Alara and asked her to meet him there. The dock was industrial, noisy and raw, a world away from the polished quiet of the penthouse. Damian stood beside the folding card table, surrounded by the rough-hewn reality of the shipping business. "I came here because this is where my inheritance is," Damian said, gesturing to the table. "Not the $1 billion, but this table. This dock, This is the truth of the Vance legacy. It was earned, not given. He looked at Alara, his eyes clear. I want to sell the penthouse, Mother. Alara was stunned. Why? It's yours. Alistair left it to you, free and clear. It's not home without Dad, and every room is an echo of the entitled life I led. It's too large, too much a symbol of the detachment. I want to use the proceeds, the $50 million cash and the sale of the house, to create a new fund within the foundation. A Second Chances Fund. It would focus on vocational training and mentorship for young adults in the south and west sides of the city. Alistair always talked about the need for mentorship, not just handouts. That is an extraordinary idea, Damien, Alara said, tears welling up. It is exactly what your father would have wanted. He always believed in the power of a second chance. I'm taking one myself, Damien replied simply. The transfer of the property was initiated. Alara, accepting the necessary change, bought a charming, smaller condominium downtown, still overlooking the lake, but a cozier, more manageable space. The shift was symbolic, moving from the fortress of the Vance Empire to a home built for a simpler, truer life. The one remaining point of contention was Cassandra's trust. Damien, now keenly aware of the responsibility of wealth, approached Mr. Sterling about his daughter's inheritance. I want to be certain Cassandra understands the values behind the money, Damien explained to the lawyer. The trust should be managed so that it facilitates her passion, environmental science, not just her comfort. I want her to work for it, to earn the satisfaction, just like her grandfather wanted me to. Mr. Sterling smiled, a rare, genuine expression. I believe Alistair's instruction was for Cassandra's portion to be held in a structured trust until her 30th birthday, precisely for that reason. It stipulates that funds must be used primarily for education, entrepreneurial ventures in environmental sustainability, and community projects. It is a trust designed to foster purpose, not mere consumption. Good, Damien sighed, deeply relieved. Then Alistair saved her, too. Alara watched her son's painful, difficult journey into humility. He had started his new role at the foundation, traveling to underserved neighborhoods, meeting community leaders, and listening to the stories of people whose struggles were a world away from the luxury of his past. He wasn't the CEO Alistair had envisioned, but he was finally becoming the man Alistair had desperately hoped he would be. The sale of the penthouse and the immediate redirection of $50 million into the foundation's new Alistair Vance Second Chances Fund became a national news story. The narrative of the entitled heir's dramatic public downfall had transformed into a compelling story of redemption. Damien, however, seemed oblivious to the media praise. He was too consumed by his work, which, for the first time in his life, felt vital and exhausting in equal measure. Alara joined him one chilly autumn morning on a visit to a vocational school the foundation supported, on the west side. The school specialized in training young adults for careers in logistics, a nod to Alistair's company. Damien was not in a suit. He wore thick jeans, work boots, and a simple foundation logo jacket. He was speaking not to the administrators, but to a group of 20 students in a mechanics workshop. My father, Damien said, leaning against a workbench, his voice carrying the deep conviction of lived experience, always said that the foundation of a successful business is not the capital, but the commitment. He built his empire from nothing, starting with a folding card table and sheer will. He picked up a greasy wrench and held it up. For 40 years, I mistook the inheritance for the legacy. I thought I was entitled to the corner office and the private jet. I was wrong. The real legacy is the satisfaction you feel when you earn something with your own two hands. My father left me $1 billion, and I lost it because I never learned the lesson that this wrench represents. You all have an opportunity here, a second chance, to build something real. Do not waste it the way I did. The students listened, rapt. His honesty was raw, humbling, and utterly effective. He wasn't a millionaire talking down to them. He was a man who had hit rock bottom, offering wisdom learned at the highest possible price. After the visit, Alara and Damien stopped for lunch at a small, bustling local diner, another far cry from his previous haunts. How do you feel, Damien? Alara asked, watching him devour a simple burger with a genuine appetite. Tired, he admitted, wiping his mouth with a napkin. But honest. For the first time, I feel like I'm earning my name. The entitlement, it was like a heavy coat I finally shed. When I was with Serafina and the lawyers, I was always anxious, always performing. Now I'm just Damien, and it feels lighter, he paused. I spoke with Cassandra last night. She is applying for a grant from the foundation to start a small nonprofit focused on restoring the urban river ecosystems. She wants me to serve on her advisory board, lending my logistic experience. She asked for my help, Mother, not my money. That felt better than the first time I made $10 million on a deal. She needs your wisdom now, Alara said, her eyes shining with pride. Not the wealth. The wisdom of a man who understands the value of a wrench over a private jet. It's a long journey, though, Damien cautioned. I still miss Alistair terribly. I still think about that empty chair every single day. I carry the weight of that absence. That weight, Alara said, reaching for his hand across the formica table, is the weight of repentance. It is heavy, but it is necessary. Alistair loved you enough to allow you to fall so that you could finally learn how to stand. The final legal chapter closed quietly a week later. Reese, now serving as Alara's personal advisor, delivered the final documents from Mr. Sterling. The resolution was complete. The company was safe under James Woodson's leadership. The $1,200,000,000 estate was distributed according to the alternate distribution plan C, protecting the legacy and benefiting thousands of employees and students. Alara realized that the true triumph was not the legal victory, but the profound human change in her son. Alistair's final choice, born of love and accountability, had worked. 9 months passed. The Vance global shipping stock stabilized, surging to new highs under James Woodson, who ran the company with the integrity Alistair demanded. The Alistair Vance Foundation became a major force in Chicago's urban renewal efforts, largely thanks to the energy and dedication Damien poured into his work. Damien was now the director of vocational outreach, a title he had earned through relentless fieldwork, not inheritance. His suits were gone, replaced by rugged, functional wear. He had lost the entitled softness around his jawline, replaced by the lean, focused look of a man who was finally working with purpose. Alara met him at a community center the foundation had helped renovate. He was organizing a job fair for young veterans. "Mother, I need your advice," Damien said, pulling her aside. "We're facing a problem with transportation. Many of our students live on the far south side, and bus routes are unreliable. They're missing crucial training hours because of 3-hour commutes each way." "What have you proposed?" Alara asked, observing his transformation. His thought process was now strategic, focused on systemic problems, not personal gain. "I've used my old logistical contacts, the same ones I once tried to sabotage," he admitted with a wry smile. "We've secured 3 decommissioned company vans. We can convert them into reliable transit, but we need 2 full-time drivers and a maintenance budget. I've written a grant proposal to the foundation for $100,000 a year to fund the program, but I need your support in presenting it to Margaret and the board." "You don't need my support, Damien," Alara said gently. "You need to present the facts and your demonstrable results. You have earned the right to run your own programs." "I know," he said, looking at her with genuine respect. "But I value your insight. You and Dad were always a team. I still feel like I'm learning how to make decisions that impact others, not just myself." Alara agreed to review the proposal, deeply moved by his continued desire for her mentorship. The foundation board meeting was held the following week. Damien presented his proposal with a professional calm that belied his previous arrogance. He didn't use flowery corporate jargon. He used personal anecdotes from the students he had met, grounding the need in real, human stories. Margaret and the foundation board members, many of whom had initially looked upon Damien with suspicion, were deeply impressed. Mr. Vance, one older board member, a retired judge, commented, "Your logistics solution is impeccable, But your passion for these students is what truly drives this. This is a far cry from the reports we used to receive about your involvement in the company." Damien simply nodded, accepting the criticism with quiet grace. "I made my life about me for 42 years. Now I'm trying to make it about them. I owe my father's legacy that much." The proposal was approved unanimously, with the added provision that Damien would personally oversee the vehicle conversion and manage the driver schedule, a level of detail he welcomed. The ongoing transformation also had a profound impact on Cassandra. Her relationship with her father was healing beautifully. She was thriving in her master's program, and her environmental nonprofit was successfully launched with the support of the structured trust. "He calls me every day, 'Grandmother,'" Cassandra told Alara over a quiet dinner one evening. "He asks about my courses. He sent me an article on sustainable port development that Grandpa Alistair would have loved. He's becoming the father I always needed. It took a tragedy, my dear. But the man your grandfather always believed in is finally emerging," Alara observed. The final, symbolic act came when Damien presented Alara with a small, carefully wrapped gift. It was a beautiful, handcrafted wooden frame containing the first photograph of Alistair and Alara together, taken during their honeymoon 46 years ago. "I found this while moving out of the penthouse," Damien explained. "I had kept it in a drawer. I realized I had kept all the luxury items and neglected the meaningful ones. I wanted you to have it back." "Thank you, Damien," Alara whispered, clutching the photo. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice hesitant. "The anniversary of Dad's passing is next month. I want to go to the cemetery. Just the three of us, you, me, and Cassandra. And I want to make sure I'm there on time this year." Alara looked into her son's eyes and saw no anger, no entitlement, only love, repentance, and quiet resolve. The painful chapter was finally closed, sealed not by legal papers, but by a genuine change of heart. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Alistair Vance's passing, 3 figures stood beside his grave in the cold, clear November sunshine. Damien, Cassandra, and Alara placed simple white roses, Alistair's favorite, against the stark, elegant granite headstone. "He would be profoundly proud today," Alara said softly, watching Damien instinctively adjust his collar. He wasn't wearing the expensive, tailored Italian suits he once favored, but a modest, functional button-down, suitable for his duties as the director of vocational outreach for the foundation. After withdrawing the lawsuit and committing to his new path, Damien had surprised everyone by asking not for money or position, but for a chance to learn the humility that defined his father's philanthropic vision. He had spent the last year visiting Mitchell Shipping's community initiatives, learning firsthand about the educational programs and economic development projects Alistair had quietly funded for decades. Cassandra, now well into her master's degree in environmental science with funding secured by her grandfather's far-sighted trust, slipped her arm through her father's. "Remember last week, Dad, at the scholarship ceremony?" she asked, a genuine smile on her face. "When that young woman from the South Side said Grandpa's program was the only reason she could attend college. Your speech was perfect." Damien smiled back, a genuine expression that finally reached his eyes, the kind of pure, unforced happiness his polished corporate smiles had never conveyed. "I just told them what I've been learning myself, Cass. That true legacy isn't measured in dollars or buildings. It's measured in the impact you have on human lives." As they walked back toward the waiting car, Damien lingered, letting Cassandra walk ahead with Alara. "Mom," he said quietly, using the informal address he had instinctively adopted since their reconciliation, replacing the stiff mother of the Serafina years. "I've been thinking about something. The company's educational initiative for employees' children, the one we've been discussing. I'd like to expand it, create a presence in 20 more neighborhoods, especially underserved areas. I want to use my own experience, the pain of learning this lesson, as a tool for outreach." "That sounds exactly like something your father would have supported," Alara replied, warmth spreading through her chest at his renewed focus on giving back. "Would you look at the official proposal with me next week?" Damien asked. his voice still seeking her approval, not as the matriarch, but as the wisdom keeper. Your input would be invaluable. I would be honored. Damien, Alara replied. As they reached the cemetery gates, Alara felt that familiar urge one last time, the compulsion to share the hard-won wisdom of their journey. She looked out at the golden autumn leaves, addressing the invisible witnesses who had followed their painful saga. If you followed our story to its conclusion, Alara said softly to the wind, remember this truth. True inheritance is not what is written in legal documents. It is the values we live by, the impact we have on others, and the courage to begin again when we have lost our way. Damien gave her a curious look, his eyebrows raised. Who are you talking to, Mom? Alara smiled, linking her arm through his, her heart full. Just an old woman's habit, my dear. Sometimes I like to imagine our story might help others navigate their own difficult paths. Like Dad's journal helped me. Damien nodded thoughtfully, understanding that her words were simply a final expression of the accountability and love that now defined their family. As they drove away from the cemetery, Alara glanced in the rearview mirror at Alistair's final resting place. The agonizing, impossible choice he had entrusted to her had ultimately achieved exactly what he had hoped. Not the punishment of their son, but his profound, necessary transformation. Damien would not lead Vance Global Shipping, but he was finally becoming the man his father had always believed he could be. Some legacies, Alara realized, are measured not in billions of dollars, but in wisdom finally received, lessons painfully learned, and relationships painstakingly restored. And by that measure, Alistair Vance's final act was his greatest triumph, leaving behind a legacy richer than any empire he had built.